And for those of you that are new to the broadcast or the webinar, the economic forecasting that I did back in March, I'll give you a little background to that. The firm that I grew up in was from New York, and it was one of the first financial planning firms, but it also had a econ department. And the minute that something would happen, whether it was the crash of 82, whether it was the crash of 87, the bond debacle in 96 where bonds fell apart, the tech crash in 99, I was in on that ground floor. And even though I was in a different department, I got to see how all these economists kind of just gathered together in just one big war room. And they started working different algorithms out of everything from interest rates to mortgage rates to everything government policy. And basically, they'd all just keep coming together until they came up with one algorithm of statistical probabilities of what would happen within each of those areas. And they were always about 70 to 80% on, which in the investment world, if you're 51% on, you're ahead of most of the crowd. And again, this was a group of probably 30 econ specialists. And so when the crash happened, when I went out on my own, the crash originally happened back in 96 and 99 with the bonds, and then 99 with the tech crash, and then again with 9/11, and then again with the Great Recession. Every one of those times, I would just use what I learned there. This is nothing that I've invented. I take zero credit for it. I just watched it. I learned it. And each time that one of these major events happened, every one of those economic mappings, again, I don't take any credit for that, but the ones that I created that were modeled after what I learned, they were in the 70 to 80% accuracy range. Within the economic mapping that those of you that attended the original broadcast that I did back in February, we're actually a little bit up. I didn't estimate it, but about 80, 85% on target with when the vaccine was released, with when the stimulus packages would come through, with what happened with the real estate, with what happened with the stock market. So again, this isn't anything I take credit for. It's nothing that I take credit for. I thank goodness gracious that I was able to get to this firm, but you're going to kind of see this unravel and what the culmination of some of this economic mapping looks like. So with no further ado, here we go. What we're going to cover today in this webinar, and what you'll have the ability to ask some questions on, let me just move this around a little bit because I didn't realize my third backup screen is going to cover my visual screen. So we're going to cover government spending and what this means with the new stimulus, new Green Deal, or if you want to even call it that, because it's some modification with that, with the progressives on the Democratic side, what it means in regulation. Now, for those of you that aren't in business, the regulation isn't really going to affect you directly, but it will affect you indirectly because of the taxes and the costs of people doing business, whether it's banking, financial services, medical, pharmaceuticals, etc. Taxes, Obamacare. This is a big one. You've ever listened to me, I've never believed in Obamacare. I thought it was the worst thing that happened. I spoke about that in 2010. I still think it has overrun the doctors. The doctors make less per hour. There's less doctors per capita now. It costs more per person. And while the claims to Obamacare being successful at 100 million people being insured, it hasn't worked on a point-by-point basis. Now, originally, the AMA was all for it, and I haven't seen much of that after 10 years of being in place, but we're going to cover that in a little bit more detail. We're also going to cover the stock markets. We're going to cover economic mapping, and then some of the questions that I've been getting a lot of, which is, what do I do with, is there a currency imbalance with what's going on with our stimulus package, the Bitcoin, and gold? And we're going to cover some of those things. And finally, we're going to wrap it up with, what do we do with our real estate? As many of you know, I have been an avid real estate investor. That's, as soon as I got my internship as a financial planner, I owned many buildings and have owned many buildings. I was talking to somebody, I think we were on deed number 79. Deeds that I've had in my name of property. So I love real estate investing. It's much like anything else. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know timing. You have to know when and what price to pay. But I'll cover some of the algorithms that are happening within the real estate market. All right. Well, this is actually breaking news. We're talking about within the last 60 minutes. We now have word of what Biden's new plan is. He's actually released some of the details to this plan. Some of it before tonight was conjecture between what Chuck Schumer wanted as an additional $2,000 to what Biden was proposing. And all we had was conjecture of between $1,400 and $2,000. We actually have what he is actually going to take for approval. It's going to be $1,400 per person in additional stimulus. That's in addition to the $600 that has come out. In addition, it's going to be $1,400 per dependent. So it's going to be pretty rich. This is why you'll probably see, as I've been predicting, this may be one of the best years the stock market has had because of the trillions of dollars. Now that the Senate is controlled by the debt split, I should say. But let's face it, if there is a split, the vice president votes, and she is extremely progressive. So if there is a split in the Senate on any kind of progressive moves, we know that it's going to go to the vice president. Our only, what would I say, bogey is Mr. Manchin from Democrat from Virginia, who is a very moderate and has disagreed with a lot of these things. So we're going to have to see how this plays out. But assuming all the votes get in, we got $1,400 per person and another $1,400 per dependent that would be coming in. Unemployment benefits. Now, again, if people ask what's my stance on this, listen, I am an incentive-based person, meaning that if you go out and work for it, then you deserve to get paid for it. But because I've owned a lot of rental properties, and I've seen the downside to welfare and Section 8. When somebody is physically and mentally able to go to work, as long as there is available work. Now, we're in this kind of catch-22 now with this virus. But once somebody is physically or mentally able to go to work, if you do not incentivize them, then you take away their incentive. All I can say is look at what's happened with the American Indian reservations over hundreds of years. Thank goodness they got smart and they put the casinos on there and they're finally thriving. But whenever you give something to somebody, and I saw this again with the rental properties, you take away a lot of that inside incentive. So I don't agree with the additional unemployment, but you have to have the cooperation of the states to open up the businesses. So some of these progressive states, New York, California, who are in massive shutdowns in opposition of a state like Florida, who has the same per capita infection rate as New York, except they are completely open. So again, you have to have the cooperation of these states to open up. But if you do, and you continue to give a lot of money on ongoing benefit, there's no incentive to go back to work. However, the $1,400 check, I don't think de-incentivizes anybody because it's a one-shot deal. People are going to go out and spend it. We also right now are at a historical low of debt per person in this country. People have been saving money. They haven't been traveling. They haven't been entertaining. They haven't been eating out. Basically, they've been ordering online, which is why those areas have gone up. But again, the issue really is if you open up the businesses, then the stimulus will get spent or it will pay down debt, which is not a bad thing because we're not out of this yet. So we also have another benefit which a lot of people were not aware of, which is a child care benefit. And what Biden's plan is if you are at a family of four income of under $125,000, which is still it's up there. They plan on giving you a check. Again, you can't say anything other than this is a welfare plan. Giving a check to each person in that each child under 6 of $350, or as you can see there, it's $3,600 a year, or $250 per child that is above 6 years old but under 13 years old. Again, not a great idea because you're just going to pass that cost on to the average person in the United States that's paying taxes with higher taxes. Unfortunately, they've also increased the minimum wage. I would have liked to see, instead of increasing the minimum wage, that they put benefits towards current education, current real estate, things that would provide more jobs, less taxes, right? Because I worked at less than minimum wage for years, and what was my motivation to getting out of it? You got to work harder, you got to work smarter, you got to go to school, you got to get educated. So there are some things here that are de-incentivizing and some things that actually I would agree with. So the original Green Deal that was planned with the five progressives, as you've probably heard about, the group of five or the band of five or whatever they're calling themselves now, was basically to put in about $3 trillion into the new Green Deal, which was not really green. A lot of that went into entitlement programs. Well, the original plan was Biden's original plan was $1.7 trillion over 10 years, but he's got a modified plan that was just released, which is a $2 trillion green plan. And this is why when we get to the stock market, we'll talk about, we will be now going into our second paradigm shift. Now, for those of you that are clients of ours, you know that in March, as soon as this virus started happening, we immediately made paradigm shifts in our portfolios. And we made 4 paradigm shifts and rebalances from March up to October. And why did I do that? Well, I learned a lot primarily during the 9/11 crash, or a terrorist attack. You know, when those planes went into those buildings, the immediate thing was everybody sheltered at home. People didn't want to go out. They were afraid to death that, there would be a terrorist on the next corner blowing something up. And people learn to adapt to that. And if you are reading into the media, you've seen that there's all kinds of studies right now. They're saying that 64%, this is a Morgan Stanley study, 64% of people will stay within their current habits. Current habits are, before the virus, the average American ordered food at home 0.75% of the time, or 0.75 times per week. During the major lockdown, it went up to 3.3 times per week. Now, even if you take 64% adherence to that habit, you're still talking about close to 2 times up from 0.75. That changes the dynamic of where people are spending money. Now you talk about putting $2 trillion in, $500 billion into green, which I'll cover what that really means. These are what we call sub-modifications of these deals. It could be EV, it could be suppliers, but I'll get into a little bit more detail of that in a few minutes. We're talking about part of Biden's plan is to create and really support unionization. Listen, I'm into unions myself. I have been in them for many, many years. I don't agree with them, which is funny because I'm into unions. I pay my union dues because I do get some benefits from it, but I really am of that incentive type of mentality. Now, unions were great in the 40s and 50s, but now with employment protection and all of the government protection against employee abuse and, slave labor and the things that weren't there before the 1940s, Warren Buffett said it best. He doesn't want to invest in companies that have unions. We've seen it with the automakers. The minute that a company goes down in revenues and profits, what happens? They have to lay people off. But the minute that they have a profit, enabling them to put away money for the future or invest in future technology, the unions a lot of times are on the doorstep wanting more. Now, that's not all unions. There are some certain unions that really take advantage of this. But this is going to be one big push. And, unionization is not a incentive or profit generated motive, and it's not friendly to the stock market in the long term. Here's something that I have mixed emotions on. Well, Biden's plan is to put 1.5 million climate sustainable homes for the poor. Listen, this whole climate thing scares the death out of me. I don't want my grandkids, growing up on a desert with no food. It is a reality of what the scientists are saying. So I agree with the things that are going forward with the green. But to give 1.5 million sustainable houses and have the government, listen, we have to learn from history. And you probably remember back in the Jimmy Carter days, there was this giant initiative to build all of this housing, public housing in all the cities. And I'll never forget it, driving across New York, going through even Buffalo, where I lived for 12 or 13 years. You have all these high rises, right? And these were built in the late 60s, early 70s, and they were supposed to support the poverty-stricken people. And they're empty now. They went into such disrepair. It was a completely failed program. And yet again, it's being repeated. So again, I think with the amount of money that they're spending on this, it could be better allocated to some things that could work better. I'm in agreement that we need to have a society that protects those who cannot protect themselves. But you know what? If you're able-bodied and there is the ability for you to go out and work, you're not the person that needs protected. Those people that are physically or mentally incapacitated, just in my opinion, that's who needs to be protected. So part of this money, this $2 trillion, is also going to go into electrical vehicles, solar-powered homes, self-sustaining factories. Here's a big one. And I really believe that this is where most of the money is going to be spent. Now, look, if you go back, everybody remembers the movie The Graduate, right? And what was the advice to Dustin Hoffman? Invest in plastics. Now, what's funny is if you would have watched The Graduate, at that time, plastics was not a big deal. So you have to think that writer had pretty good insight into the future. Well, we can look at what's happening. We can simply make projections as to where money is flowing to. And you could have done that every decade. I mean, if you were, in the 80s and you had 8 tracks, you saw that conversion into cassette tapes. And then in the 80s going into the 90s, you saw it converted into CD-ROMs. And then 90s going into the 2000s, it was Blu-ray. And then Blu-ray turned into streaming, right? We don't all have to be geniuses. We can recognize how we live. If you take a look at the one of the best investors next to Warren Buffett, it was Peter Lynch. If you know what Peter Lynch, how he made one of his biggest investment gains, it was because of his wife. His wife got home one day and she was late. And he said, "Where were you, honey?" We said, "I went to this new store and it was called Home Depot. And there was this line out the door. I couldn't get in. I had to wait for 2 hours." So what did Peter Lynch do? Well, he said, everybody's spending their money there. Hey, I'm going to buy some of that Home Depot. So again, we make projections based upon where people spend money and what they have to have and going forward. One of those is going to be hydrogen, and they're putting a lot of money into it. Electrical, wind, and nuclear. So these are all components of what we're going to call the fourth phase paradigm shift portfolio, because we started with one paradigm shift portfolio back in March, but we didn't know who was going to get elected, and we didn't know who was going to control the House and the Senate. Now that we do, and now that we know the approximate amount of money that will be allocated towards certain areas, it's a little easier to make some of these decisions. So regulation, I am a little mixed on this. I think personally, banks need better regulation. We saw what the banks did to people in the Great Recession, right? The government bailed them out, which really means you and I bailed them out with higher country debt, more taxes, etc. And then what did the banks do? The banks got bailed out. And then companies like Bank of America and Wells Fargo and et cetera, they went after people and foreclosed and bankrupted people, even though they got paid off by the government. So I don't agree with that. Now, what the feds just did is the Treasury. They just required that the banks shore up their balance sheets and change their reserve numbers, which I think was a very smart thing, considering that at that time there was about 8.4 million mortgages that were in forbearance. I'll show you where those numbers stand today, but I will tell you that I think that the government, I know I'm saying this, I know, somebody document this. In the sense of the government regulating the banks, I think they did a good job with the Treasury. The insurance companies and the securities companies. Well, the insurance companies and the securities companies, I think the financial world needs to be regulated better. When Obama got out of office, there was something called the DOL rule, the Department of Labor rule, and it was going to create full transparency with fees, expenses, conflicts of interest. And this was supposed to come out back in 2016. It had failed in 5 attempts through Congress. And finally, the Fifth Circuit of Texas knocked it down in 2017, giving the DOL record no chance of survival. What the DOL record, again, rule was, is there had to be full disclosure. So you couldn't have a financial planner that was really an annuity salesman say, "I'm a financial planner." So it is technically illegal now, but this would have imposed civil and criminal penalties. You couldn't have a mutual fund say, "Hey, you're only paying 1.5%," when John Bogle fully peeled that onion back and said, "Listen, mutual funds have 9 separate fees. Why is it that only 2 out of the 9 fees are legally required to be disclosed?" The DOL rule would have gotten rid of that, which is why a lot of those mutual funds have gone down. They laid off a lot of people. So the DOL rule, I really believed in. I think we need better and more financial disclosure to the consumer. So the downside to the regulation is there's better protections in some areas. Unfortunately, they're not talking about too much in pharmaceuticals or healthcare, but mainly in banking and financials. But I think that this is a good thing. But again, what this will do is it will create more costs for financial institutions, thus increasing operating costs, thus reducing any kind of returns that the average person might get. So again, there is a cost to the regulation. All right, let's talk about how all of this stuff is going to get paid for. Well, it's going to be you and me. It's going to be the tax dollars. I mean, we are at our borrowing limit. I mean, the federal government right now is like a 15-year-old teenager with a $100,000 line of credit on their credit card, and they're overdrawn right now. They do not have it. Now, when we talk about currency in a minute, we're going to talk about what the currency balance is. And generally, what we always do is we compare our currency to the other countries and see where we are, strong or weak. During this virus, I am not going to be as concerned with how we compete in currency to other countries in the exchange rate. And one of the reasons is all of the countries, all developed countries, have had to issue stimulus to survive. So while we might look at what our balance sheets are, and we might say, gosh, we are in a currency deficit at this point, that has to be compared to every other country. If every other country has to borrow, well, while we still look bad, we're still not competitively bad to those other countries. But here's what it's going to look like for corporate income tax. To me, I think this is the worst possible thing that you could do to our country. In 2017, when Trump tax reform went through, and they lowered the corporate tax, which made our country much more competitive, because what were companies doing? You had Apple, you had Google, and they were moving. Apple had close to $1 trillion in what they used to call the Irish offset. And so basically these companies would set up companies within Ireland because their corporate tax rate at that time was 14%, and ours was, 40% or something like that. And they would basically operate the company out of there. They would sell goods and services here, but the profits would stay overseas, thus cutting that tax down. Well, when Trump got in, they made this provision, hey, bring your money back to this country. We'll forgive any kind of, have a tax amnesty. They got some of that money back. But what do you think is going to happen? The big boys on the block, they're hiring the Deloittes of the world, and they're going to just figure out how to move money to other countries yet again. Again, money flows in the economies of that money. If you tax somebody too high in California, I don't care what Governor Newsom says, yeah, people won't be leaving. And you know what? If they leave, good riddance, because we have the best weather in the world. When somebody's paying 50 to 60% in taxes, they can move to Nevada, Florida, Texas, wherever, and they can go on vacation for a lot less and get some good weather, right? Or they can have a vacation property, but they don't have to be foot down on taxes in those countries. So again, people will follow the economies. And again, this is a terrible, terrible thing, I think, with the corporate tax rate. Is this going to push us back to, prior to the Obama days where we were not competitive? The personal income tax rate, again, this is something I've been preaching about, stumping about for years and decades. When they increase the personal income tax rate, this means that money that you thought you would put away before tax into IRAs, 401ks, profit sharing plans, what are they going to do? Well, they already knocked your socks off with the Secure Act back in January of 2020 by getting rid of the stretch provisions, but now they're going to increase the personal income tax rate. What does that really mean? It means that when you are forced to take money out of your IRA retirement plan, you're going to pay a higher rate than you might have paid when you actually put it in, thus turning upside down your original intent. The intent of those plans is to put money away at a higher rate, take it out at a lower rate. Stock losses, one of the things that on Biden's plate is to disallow any stock losses at all. You'll pay taxes on the gains, but disallow the losses. So an entire reversal of the Trump tax reform when it comes to Schedule A. What is Schedule A? Well, Schedule A is you compare your itemized deductions to your standard deduction. If you have itemized deductions that exceed the standard deduction, you get to take the itemized. If the itemized is less than the standard, you take the standard. Right now, the standard is $12,000 per person, a little bit more if you're 65. But what they're going to do is they're going to try to unleash the SALT cap. Remember, the SALT cap, which is state and local income taxes, really only affected people in places like California, places like Illinois, places like New York, where you had just ridiculous state income tax and property tax. There was a cap of $10,000. The Biden plan is to uncap that so the people in those Democratic states can get bigger tax deductions. One good thing is they'll have a return of the miscellaneous deductions, which is where people pay for tax returns, professional advice, and you get to deduct it. But unfortunately, along with that, they're also going to bring back that health care penalty. Now, if you don't know what that health care penalty is, during the Trump regime, what they were able to do is disqualify the penalty that you would pay if you did not have health insurance or the right amount. They're talking about taking that back through the court system and getting that penalty applied, or simply taxing everybody at a base rate for Obamacare. Not good, in my opinion. Loss of the preferred dividend tax. So some of you have dividend portfolios and you're getting those dividends. And during the last, even in Obama days, the preferred dividend got a reduced tax. It was taxed as if it was a capital gains tax, which is either at a 0, 10, or 15 at the max 20% tax rate versus ordinary income, which is almost double that. So what that means is that if you have dividends, and those used to get taxed at preferred tax rates, the tax could double under this new tax plan. Here's another one, estate tax. Well, for the last, whatever it's been, 10 years, we've had a $5 million per person, I'm rounding, estate tax. And then during the Trump years, it went up to about 11 million, about 23 million for a married couple. Well, that law was actually set to expire in 2026 and revert back to $5 million per person. But now the plan is to reduce that amount between $1 to $3 million, and that's per couple. That means you could have a house, life insurance, furniture, wedding ring, investment accounts, real estate, everything gets put into that number. And look, if you were a millionaire 40 years ago, that was a lot of money. But a millionaire today, people live in $500,000-$600,000 houses, and then they got $1 million in their retirement account. All of a sudden, now you have estate taxes. So again, the old structures of how we used to avoid estate taxes between delaying between the husband and wife death, between using different types of trusts like offset trusts and ILITs, those are going to probably come back in a big way into popularity. And then the last thing is shortening of the IRA distribution. So we know that under the Secure Act, which passed in July of 2020, the act went from being able to leave it to your kids and spread out the life expectancy of your IRA deposits as old as your kids are, or depending upon how we structured it within your IRA trusts, you could split it out between 3 different ages if you had 3 different kids. Well, that got shortened down into 10 years in January of last year. Well, now what they're talking about is the proposals are bringing it back to 5 years. And why? Because if you died, you got $1 million in your IRA and you're going to leave it to your child. And in the prior law, you could leave it to, say, a 40-year-old, and $1 million, they might only have to take out 15, 20 grand a year. That's it, right? But under the new Secure Act, if you had $1 million, they have to take $100,000 out per year in taxable income. Well, that has an effect, because if you take your child who might be earning $50,000, $100,000, you stack on top of that another $100,000. What's that going to do to their tax bracket? Guess what? This is one of the reasons why they're going to raise the tax bracket. Now, that child will rise up to, if not the highest bracket, pretty close to it, right, with a couple $100,000. So this whole campaign promise of we're not going to raise taxes for anybody that's earning less than $400,000. If you watched the broadcast that I did before that about how I debunked that statement, everything I'm showing you right here is already debunking the statement. Because if you have a preferred dividend, you lose that. You lose your capital gains tax preference. Your estate tax is going to go down. Well, you're still earning less than $400,000, but you're still going to pay a lot more in tax. There's other things that are in this bill or in Biden's plan that have nothing to do. So his statement was, we will not raise your income tax if you're earning less than $400,000 per year. Well, what about an event? What happens if you sell a house in that particular year? Are you more than 400? You bet. You better believe it. That means that all of your income now gets taxed differently, right? So the other provision, which has nothing to do with your 400,000, is the loss in the step up in basis. So when we die now, we can take a stock that maybe we spent $50 and on it to buy it, and now it's worth $100, and we die, we can leave that to our kids or heirs, anybody, right? And all of that capital gains is forgiven. So what the Biden plan is really proposing to pay for all of these programs is basically taking away any kind of deferral or any kind of loss, any kind of bonus depreciation for you business owners, any kind of the benefits that we were able to work within that structure. So right now the plan is all assets passing to children, all gains would be taxable as ordinary income, which is horrible. And so you have the loss of the capital gains, the preferred dividend exclusion loss, stock and house exclusion losses. And I'll talk about this in a second, the 1031 exchange. So, I have 1031 exchange properties my whole life. You move it from one to another if you like it. You can sell a house and exchange it for another one, and all the gains are deferred. And then when you die, everything is passed on to the children with absolutely no tax. That law has actually been in place in the United States since 1927. And right now, the plan is to get rid of any 1031 exchanges, which, can you imagine? You got to think through history, right? If any of you have a memory of the 1986 TRA, that was the Tax Reform Act. I was practicing back then, and I remember what happened. They changed the depreciation schedule and the deductibility level on real estate. And you know what happened to real estate? It crashed. It dropped like a rock for years. Matter of fact, the drop in real estate was so bad back then, that is what caused the entire collapse of the savings and loans. You don't see them anymore, do you? That's because they went away in 86. So some of you may even remember the Willie Nelson debacle. His, advisors told him to buy all of these real estate limited partnerships, right? They're just called 1031 ticks now. They changed the name to protect the guilty. But they used to be called limited partnerships. Oh, the other thing they're calling them is DSTs, Delaware Statutory Trusts. Those were the old family limited partnership or real estate limited partnerships. And so he bought a bunch of these, and then when they changed the tax law, he didn't have the money to pay the tax on the recapture of the depreciation. The poor guy went bankrupt. I don't know if you remember this. He had to do a lawn sale and auction stuff off just to pay his tax. So this is really the result of tax law change in the real estate. And this happened in 86. If Biden gets his way and changes the 1031 exchange rules, expect a huge, huge depression in the real estate. There's other ways that they can tax us without having to earn $400,000 per year. So here's a great example. So my father-in-law is a policeman in Dothan, Alabama, police captain. He collects guns. And so this law that they're trying to do, because it's unconstitutional, take away our right to bear arms, but the government can still tax it. And so the plan is to tax every gun, and under the auspices of gun control, right? And we all know from statistics that it's not about gun control, because it's based upon culture and some other things, but they're going to basically tax every person. So what happens when you have that single female with 2 kids, and she's on her own, she's living in a house, and she wants protection of a gun? But maybe she is that what the government is saying they're trying to protect, which is the low-income people. But maybe she's at that low income and she's working her rear end off, but she wants protection. Well, if she has a handgun with, say, 3 clips, how is the heck is she going to afford $800 in a gun tax? And she's not making $400,000 a year. So again, these methods are all there to pay for all of these programs that they want to spend money. Federal property tax. So one of the Biden proposals is, in order to enhance what we're doing, what they're spending money on, they want to come up with a federal income tax. We already know how it works. You look at your property tax bill, and it's got school tax, fire tax, county improvement tax. Well, now they want to put another line item on there, federal property tax. Again, not a good idea to mess around with real estate, and has never worked in the past to try to overtax people in that area. It just affects the real estate. And let's look at what happens. You go back to the Great Recession, and real estate dropped 50 to 75%. And what happened to most of the counties in the federal government? They couldn't collect the property taxes anymore, so a lot of the state governments were bankrupt, and they had to go to the federal government to get money. So again, it doesn't really work. So again, going back to the loss of the Trump tax reform, they're looking at bringing that from 12,000 back to the 6,000 to where it was before. All right, let's delve into my issue, which I have a big issue with the healthcare system and the way it's set up. When Obamacare came out and they drew state lines and insurance companies were mandated to sell different policies within state lines, it removed the competitiveness of those policies to compete against each other across state lines. And I didn't agree with it because I saw, and I know the AMA was so for this, but I knew this was coming because when I looked at all the clients that we have that were physicians, I said, wait a minute, what you're basically doing is you're going to give healthcare, free healthcare, to millions and millions of people. We don't have the infrastructure to cover that. We don't have the number of hospitals. We don't have the number of doctors. And because in our country, you're de-incentivized to become a physician because of the cost, the time, the federal loans that you have to take. There is not the same incentive. You know, the old joke is, well, I'll fly to Sweden, and get my medical education there. I actually had a friend of mine that went to Guatemala and got his medical degree there and then came back and got recertified here. So again, we don't live in a country that has a great incentive to produce a lot of doctors. So we are short doctors per capita, right? That's why we have some of the healthcare problems that we have. And so the new Biden plan when it comes to healthcare is going to be to change the income that you pay, or the percentage of your income up to a certain limit. It's going to change that. Now, before it used to use a much smaller or higher cap. They're going to reduce the cap to 8.5%. So to give you an example, what this might look like is if a person that's earning a family before that's earning $110,000 per year, and let's say right now they're spending $1,500 a month on health insurance, the cap will reduce that cost to about $750 per family. Now, listen, there is nothing for free. There is no magic number. You can't take 2 + 2 and equal 6. It just doesn't work, right? It's physics and math. So the benefits on this are going to have to be paid for by somebody. It's going to be paid for by additional federal income tax and all of these other taxes that I just told you that are going to be stacked on for all of you, whether or not you're making $400,000 or more or not, right? Because if there's a federal property tax, that applies to everybody. If you have a capital gain, that applies to everybody. If you have preferred dividends, that applies to who owns those preferred dividends. Again, so the Obamacare, to me, I am not in favor of it, but there is one single thing that I think I'm in favor of, and because this has actually happened to me. It's called surprise billing. And as an example, when my family travels, our Nevada health plan covers emergency rooms, but it doesn't cover chronic care. It doesn't cover operations. It would not cover if I was in an ICU for COVID if I was traveling. And so you have to be very careful of your state mandated plan and whether it's going to cover you in state or just in state and or out of state and what's actually covered. But there was another issue with the healthcare that Obamacare just failed on drastically. So let's say that you have a marketplace plan, and let's say that you go in the hospital that's in your network, because those marketplace plans will exclude benefits completely. So you could be in Las Vegas and go to one hospital. I think Sunset Hospital was not in our network, but I can't remember, Horizon, or I don't even remember the name of it now. Summerlin Hospital was in our network, right? So if I went to, I forgot the name of it now, but that other hospital that wasn't in my network, then nothing is covered. Now, if I go to Summerlin, that hospital is in the network. However, let's say that I go in there for an emergency surgery, and the anesthesiologist that comes in, let's say he's not in my network. So I'm in the hospital, I believe that I'm covered. Now this guy charges me $100,000 out of network. How am I going to pay that, right? So at least this new rule, the one positive is it would stop surprise billing. Because I think that kind of puts the patient at a disadvantage, especially if they don't know who is attending to them. So here's what the healthcare with Obamacare outcome really looks like. What fails to address the real problems. We have a shortage of physicians. That's the bottom line, because of the system that we have set up. And we have a terrible system for doctors. I mean, I would not want to be a doctor. The average doctor gets sued 7 times during his tenure. It depends on what, if you're in orthopedics, if you're vascular, if you're neuro versus OB versus family. There's different percentages. But these poor people, men and women, they're just hammered with frivolous lawsuits. There is no control on that, and I think there should be some control on that. There's high cost of medical school. So look, instead of forgiving debt of those people that went to school, why not simply benefit the medical schools to get us more doctors that can serve us and make healthcare available? It's not healthcare is not available because it's not affordable. It's because we're a shortage of doctors. Pharmaceutical pricing. How is it that we can go to Texas and we can get one antibiotic and it costs us $70, yet we cross right over into Mexico and it's $7? I mean, there is not fair equality in that, and nobody can tell me that that is a fair system. Well, I think that's where some of the regulations should come in, right? And I think insurance companies are limited to the policies at state level. And here's one of the things, if you don't understand what's coming out down the line. When they say Medicare for all, now the gang of five wants to just provide free medical care, right? That's Bernie Sanders' socialistic mentality. Who's going to pay for that? I don't know, but their mentality is just give it to everybody. Now, Biden's plan is Medicare for all, but at a cost. So if you don't like the marketplace plan, well, then you can go on Medicare. Now, they're going to increase the price of Medicare, and it'll be banded just like it is now, so that if you're earning more than $75,000 or $78,000, they're going to think it is now, as a single individual, your Medicare cost goes up. It's income tested, right? But the problem is doctors and hospitals have a hard time surviving on Medicare, which is why a lot of doctors have gone to concierge and not accepting Medicare. So if you go for a procedure at a doctor, and let's say that he's got to charge $400 for that procedure. He's got to pay for office space. He's got to pay for malpractice insurance. He's got to pay for supplies. He's got to pay for salaries. He's got to pay for all this stuff. And if he figures out the typical profit margin on $400 is maybe 20 to 25%, because he hasn't gotten paid yet, or she hasn't gotten paid yet, right? So if that's the average profit margin, now Medicare comes in and says, for that $400 procedure, we're going to give you $220. Well, how do you do that? How do you survive as a physician? So again, I think the whole Obamacare is upside down. It should be incentivize the doctors, give them more profit to hire more people, hire more doctors, provide more facilities. You don't get better medical care by taxing people more and then just providing free insurance if you don't have the infrastructure to cover it. I go back to what I said in 2010. Again, you're going to have, if you're covering in this Medicare for all and this Obamacare for all, and you're covering all of these people, including, and this just lights my candle right now, is undocumented workers are going to get free medical care. My gosh, well, I'm paying for my own medical care, and I'm from this country, and I work here, and I pay my taxes. So again, little thorn in the side there. So let's jump into real estate and where we are with the forbearances, because I think this is going to have a big impact on what you do with your real estate. And if you've been following my broadcast since March of last year, so almost going on 1 year, I was at version 6 until about an hour ago. So what I'm going to be doing is releasing a version 7, but that version 7 of that economic mapping with real estate is going to include what Biden just released technically now about 2 hours ago with the forbearance program. We were kind of on pins and needles as to what they were going to provide, which is total forgiveness, which is not what we wanted, because that would just cost the taxpayers more. We were worried about just extending the actual forbearance because that might have a hurting on the bond market. But here's what the actual facts are. Real estate pricing is based upon simple supply and demand, right? It always has been, as does everything. It also depends upon what the Treasury does and the Feds do with interest rates and buying back their notes. And it also has to do with employment, right? We saw that during the Great Recession. We had reasonable interest rates. They weren't super low. They were 5 or 6%. But you were giving a mortgage to a $30,000 a year earner that was $1 million mortgage. Those numbers don't click, right? So again, employment and income does work. Right now, we are, as of December 1st, we're at 5.48%. I'm sorry, 5.54. So the number of forbearances and mortgage foreclosures actually started to decrease in July and August. But this number is going to follow the same trend line as unemployment. So in December, we lost 178,000 jobs. It was the first time in 7 months that the unemployment actually went up. I mean, we were on a good trend, but then what happened is more lockdowns, more states were not allowing inside dining, outside dining, whatever it was. And so we saw 178,000 more jobs lost. Well, that pushes up the forbearance and the foreclosure rates, right? So what this really means is that we are on an upward trend of foreclosures as the virus continues to spike. Well, what we just saw, and right now there are 2.8, now this is not the total, but there are 2.8 FHA mortgages in forbearance, or foreclosures, delayed payments of mortgages, there's 8.4 million. Now to put that in context, in 2007, 2008, the Great Recession, all generated and spurred by foreclosures. Now, you got to compare this. There was 1.6 million, 1.6 million foreclosures then, and right now we're sitting on 2.8 in forbearance and 8.4 in total delays, right? This is going to affect the real estate market. And listen, no different. Back in those days, I had a radio show that was syndicated, and I kept saying, real estate is overpriced. Real estate is overpriced. You got to get out of real estate. And you should have seen all the hate mail that I got from realtors or real estate people. Oh, what are you doing? You know, real estate's always going to go up. It's never going to be affected. It is affected. It goes through cycles and trends. They're just different cycles and trends in stocks and bonds, but they are still cycles and trends. So again, right now, what we just learned about 2 hours ago is part of Biden's plan is the forbearance, again, that was originally slated to hit in April of 2021. Trump pushed an extension to July of 2021. Biden just released a couple hours ago, it's going to be extended until September of 2021, which will then push my economic mapping as to prime time to buy real estate a few months past that period of time. Because again, real estate's not like the stock market. The stock market can drop in a day. Real estate generally takes about 60 days to 90 days to show those price inefficiencies. Well, let's jump to the stock market. As I had stated in March or April, we might see one of our best years in 2020, and we did. And as you can see there, the Dow was up 7.3%, S&P was up 16.3%, and the NASDAQ for last year was up 43%. So it was a great year. Now, not everybody's going to be 100% in the NASDAQ. You might have some REIT stock bond balances to accommodate your retirement portfolio. But you can see, based upon what happened last year, it went up. And I am anticipating a huge, huge 2021. And why? Because we're still dumping close to $2, maybe $3 trillion into this market in the next 12 months. Okay? So let's review the updated economic mapping. I'll have one or two more slides, and then we're going to get into some questions. Okay, so the economic mapping that I started back in March of 2020, and I predicted back then, not predicted, but just did the algorithms based upon the unemployment rate, based upon the stimulus of when that real estate was going to bottom out. Originally, it was going to be around July, August, because the forbearance was going to end in April. Then I pushed it to September to December when Trump extended it to August. And now I'm pushing it yet again, okay? I'm now pushing that back into probably your prime time is going to be December to maybe March, April of 2022, right? Because of the time, that gestation time. So what's happened is that unemployment is going to kind of work in lockstep. Well, I shouldn't say it doesn't really, because you would visualize them going together. There's a delay on the real estate as it applies to the algorithm of unemployment. But you can see here, I circled that red circle of opportunity when I think would be a great time. Now, we do see that somewhere in the first quarter to second quarter of 2021, we're going to start to see those tax plans being voted on. Why? They want to start spending money. When they start spending money, they got to have the tax revenues to do it. The stock market, because of this, will most likely have 1 to 2 years of its biggest upside. Now, here's another upside to things. Because of the virus, because of the context of the virus, we have now seen one of the biggest in a long time, almost 100 years, the pay down of personal debt and what we call pent-up spending energy. Now, I'm going to give you 2 times in history that you can relate this to. In the 1300s, we know about the Black Plague, and the Black Plague killed close to 20 million people worldwide. It was one of the most devastating plagues ever. But before the Black Plague hit in the 1300s, Europe had a very thriving, extremely thriving economy. It got to be where land was so valuable that the kings could raise, and that was the feudal society, they could raise the taxes to an extent where those farmers could barely make a dime because the land was so scarce. Well, and also what would happen in the 1300s, it was very villagey, meaning that those people that they were born in a village typically would stay within that village and farm. Well, when that plague happened, what they learned from that is people went on spending sprees because the attitude was, well, the plague could kill me next week, so I'm going to spend all my money on this expensive piece of art. And when the plague ended, it was the biggest economy boost, and it was also the biggest dispersion of employment. You've heard me talk about this change in paradigm shift of where money's spent and how people will live differently, and that happened in the 1300s. Then again, in 1919, when we had the Spanish flu, again, we had the same exact situation. That actually started the Roaring 20s. We had this pent-up energy, this pent-up desire to go travel, spend money, get back to normality, and people couldn't go out or they wouldn't go out, so they started saving. They reduced debt. We are there now. We are at the precipice of that. We are on the launching pad of that. And in the 1300s, there was not an organized government that would provide stimulus. In 1919, there was not an organized government that provided stimulus, yet it still blew through the ceiling with the economy. So we are sitting on so many different financial factors that would lead to the next year or 2 years of being some of the best returns and most fruitful. Now, we all know what happened after the Roaring 20s, right? We had the stock market crash of 28, 29. And a lot of that was because things were so overpriced. There was no regulation. There was no controls. So again, this can't last forever. But again, in the stock market, I think it's just a matter of as soon as this money gets allocated and approved, we're going to miss out on that upbeat in the stock market. The real estate, we have a little bit more time because that forbearance has to gestate and get to that vesting point of foreclosures. So again, we're sitting on these places, on this rocket fuel, basically. So people, they ask me, well, what about gold? Okay, I am a Warren Buffett fan when it comes to gold. Gold is emotionally based. There is no premise or foundation in gold. Gold, from what I have seen, is sold on fear, and none of what I've seen on TV is actually accurate. What you'll see is these advertisements on TV where the guy says, well, if you would have bought gold at this point, it would be worth this. Oh, that's easy. I or you could pick any point in time in any market, whether it's real estate, gold, whatever it is, stocks. You could pick the perfect time to start your calculation of returns and then show. Well, it's like mutual funds did after the great crash of 87. They all picked the date at the lowest point when they were advertising that one Super Bowl that I always talk about. They picked the lowest point and then said, hey, we made 30%. Well, actually, you made 3%. But you pick the lowest time in history to calculate that actual return. So again, gold, people will say, well, if the world falls apart and if currency falls apart, I can use gold. Not necessarily. There's plenty of examples in history where other commodities were worth more than gold. It could be that toilet paper and paper towels are worth more than gold. It's what people want, and it may not be gold. Food may be worth more than gold. The other issue with gold that I have to cover is gold, to me, the whole idea of buying gold, storing it, is big scam. I had a client come to me years ago and said, hey, I just bought $800,000 of gold in case the world falls apart. I said, great. Now, this one I had practiced in Florida. I said, where's the gold at? Well, in Texas. I said, okay, the world falls apart. How are you going to get to Texas and get your gold? I said, are they going to let you into the vault if the world comes to an end? Are they going to let you in? And then if you get the gold, who are you going to exchange it with for food or shelter or protection, right? He goes, I never thought of that. And he was paying all this money for insurance and storage and everything else. And so again, gold, I'm not a big fan of. I want to buy, like Warren Buffett says, I want to buy companies where people are spending money, there's growth, and there's profit. Bitcoin, same thing. This is a hedge. It's a gamble. It's the new tulip of the tulip issue of the big scam going on with tulips on, what was it, 1860 or something. And Bitcoin is a currency that will come to light, but not in the trading fashion. Again, it's just gambling. You take a Bitcoin, it goes to 42,000, and then as soon as 31,000, it was 25,000, it went to 6,000. Again, it's a gamble trade. And again, we talked about the currency at the beginning of today's webinar, which is our currency is in bad shape, but competitively with other countries, because they've also had to issue all of this stimulus, we're not in such bad shape anymore, okay? And actions to take: change portfolio to a paradigm shift portfolio. Follow where the money is being spent. Refinance your real estate. Consider Treasury inflation protected securities right now as a major cash holding versus short-term things, especially like CDs, bonds. Reverse mortgages, big fan of them, always have been. Best time in the world to do them right now when interest rates are low. And by the way, looking at what's going on with the Treasury and what's going on with all the different things within the government, I'm going to make a prediction that March or April mortgage rates will start to increase. So refinance now. Reduce long-term bonds and tax plan. And again, I'm making a recalculation based upon the Biden plan an hour ago. The prime time, November of this year to maybe March of next year, may be the prime time for real estate. And because of the Fed's change and elimination of the Phillips curve, structure income and investments for inflationary protection. And with that in mind, we're going to open up to questions. Hopefully you kept up with all that. You wrote some good questions there. And let's see. Wow, God, good questions here. Holy mackerel. All right, I'm going to try to get through all these that I can as fast as I can. Okay, so here's the first question. It's a little technical. I'll try to explain it. I'll try to explain terms that would make sense. So in a lot of our financial planning techniques to reduce and eliminate estate tax, the goal is to get assets out of your name before they grow, and sometimes we can get those out of your name at a discount. I'll give you an example of this. I worked on a case in LA. There was $30 million of real estate, and we were able to get that real estate out of our clients' names and into a combination of LLCs and irrevocable trusts for a total value of $11 million. So if they did nothing, that $30 million is going to pass through their estate and get totally taxed. And if what they're talking about now, that would cost $12, $15 million in tax. Versus we work on scenarios of moving assets into devices, we're going to call them. There's grits, there's grats, there's cruts, there's NIM cruts, there's crats, there's irrevocable trusts, there's ILETs. There's one that I always love the name of this. It's called an intentionally defective irrevocable trust. We always laugh. We said that only the legal profession can come up with something that's called intentionally defective and actually charge money for it. All of these devices are simple devices to move assets from place A to place B at a discount, get them out of a taxable scenario. So to answer your question, what happens if you do a 10-year grat and you're still alive, you have a reversion back into the estate? So you have to take a look at all of these different devices of which I just stated and do a cost-benefit analysis and a what-if analysis within each one. And one is not always the best device to use. You may use multitude of those devices. So again, there's grit, grats, gruts, crats, cruts, NIM cruts. There's family foundations. There's operating charities. There's ILETs. There's IDIGITs, which is the intentionally defective irrevocable trust. So there's a number of different arrows that we carry in our quiver to kill the tax beast, basically. And it may take one arrow. It may take a number of different arrows to take down the tax beast. Okay, here's a question. Can I just retire? What should I do with my 401k? Well, I'll tell you what you do. Number one, I don't know what your investment risk is because I have no idea what your financial fingerprint is. You need to, number one, get a financial plan done because that will tell you what to invest in, how to invest it, what the time periods and the volatility is. But number one, get the money out of the 401k. Here is why. Number one, a 401k is one of the worst vehicles to invest in. The reason is they give you a menu of mutual funds. And generally, those mutual funds are not the most competitive funds. They're not the best performance funds. They're usually selected within the good old boys club or the golf game club of what they're going to add into that menu of items, right? There's more lawsuits. And here's what's really funny. Fidelity's employees sued Fidelity for giving them garbage funds and overpriced funds within their own 401k. So there's a lot of class action suits. So number one, get them out of the 401k. Get it into your own self-directed IRA that you can choose what you want. If there's 25,000 mutual funds, there's 22,000 ETFs. There's like 40,000 stocks to choose from. There's a plethora of choices, and you don't have to be self-contained to this little menu of 10, 20, or 30 mutual funds that your 401k lists. Number two reason is 401ks do not comply very easily with the new Secure Act. Most 401ks have not revised their plan documents and putting it into a stretch IRA versus the new Secure Act, which has a 10-year payout. So your heirs could have some big problems. Here's the third reason why I tell you to get it out of the 401k yesterday. When it comes to RMD, 401ks do what's called aggregated payouts. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you have 3 funds in your 401k. Let's say you have a bond, you have a stock, and you have a REIT. And let's say the stock and the REIT are in the downers. They've just fallen apart. They're down 30%. When the 401k makes the distribution to you, they have to take a proportionate amount from each fund. Well, the last thing in the world that you're probably going to want to do is sell the REIT and sell the stock because you want to wait till they come back. But if you keep it in the 401k, the RMDs are going to require aggregated payouts. So you're selling stuff that you wouldn't normally sell. So again, you want to get that out. Move it to an IRA. Any suggestions that I have would probably be Schwab and TD are our favorites. There's some other custodians out there, but you got to make sure that they're not charging annual fees and there's no commissions. Okay. Here's one. What are some of the strategies if the step up in basis goes away besides charitable donations? Okay, we don't know all the rules on what's going to be allowed within the new rules, but if they do away with the step up in basis, we go back to the training of tax strategy, right? What can I do within tax strategy? And we have to look at what the rules are that are going to be available. I can defer things. I can deduct things. I can shift things, or I can offset. Deductions everybody knows about, right? Yeah, you have a mortgage deduction. That's pretty simple. I can defer things. Everybody knows that. It's pretty simple. You put away money into a 401k. You defer the tax on it till a later time when you hope that it's going to be less. But most of the things that people never look at is how to shift or offset. What would shifting be? Well, maybe a C corporation would now be right. Maybe an S corporation would be right. Maybe a holding company. Maybe a trust. Where you're taking your assets and you're putting it into a different name. That name may either be able to split the tax into different buckets, where instead of, the American tax strategy is, all this income stacks up, and then as you're stacking income up, wages, dividends, capital gains, real estate sales, well, now you're at the highest bracket. Think of it this way. Splitting or shifting simply takes it and puts it into 2 places. And now instead of riding the bracket up, I'm only riding the bracket up on these 2, but it's at 2 different levels, which reduces the actual tax. Now, offsetting is another technique that we use a lot of, and that might be using things like conservation easements, accelerated depreciation, accelerated deductions. There was a technique, and we had to do away with it in the Trump years because of the limit on mortgage deductions, but this may be coming back, where we take a mortgage on our house and we use the deduction on the mortgage to do Roth conversions to get money out of an IRA to a Roth tax-free. Because we had limitations on that, it didn't work for everybody. But if they do away with Trump tax reform and they bring back that unlimited mortgage deduction, we'll be able to get back to it again. So again, there's 4 techniques within tax reduction strategies: is defer, deduct, shift, or offset. So Once we get the hardcore numbers, once it's approved by the government, we can start looking at everybody's situation as to what they can actually do. All right, I love this one. I have to read this. I'll put it in there. AMA is terrible. I'm a doctor and I quit. Yeah, I have nothing but compassion for doctors. They just spend their whole lives getting educated, and they're just always the receptacle of lawsuits, more tax, more government oversight, more regulations. I think it's just the opposite of what we need to do with them. We need to incentivize them, not penalize them. Okay, here's another one. Ken, who's going to pay for the health care? That's where all these tax changes are coming in. This is what they're doing. They're basically trying to do away with all of the tax reform and all of the deferrals with 1031s and those things, and all of that tax. And again, it's a huge lie, this whole $400,000. I mean, you could take the context of what was said. If I said to you, I'm not going to raise your tax bracket if you earn less than 400,000. Well, okay, that's how they've always done it. That's how they always lied to the American public. Because they could say, here's your tax bracket. But if we now tax dividends differently, you pay more tax. Well, we didn't raise your tax bracket. We just made you pay tax on something that you wouldn't pay tax on. So again, we're all going to be paying for this. Here's another question. Ken, what is the biggest piece of advice you can give us for 2021 at this stage? I would say number one, tax plan. Number two, rearrange your investments to take advantage of this big opportunity that in my 40 years of practice, I've never seen anything like what I see coming down the line. I think that this will be, probably in my entire lifetime, the biggest opportunity ever. Let's see, profitability of rental home, 1031. When you sell rentals, you pay ordinary income, deductibility of expenses. Okay, I'm not sure. Let me see if I can diagnose that question. Profitability of rentals, no 1031. If you sell rentals, you will pay ordinary income, deductibility of expenses. If you want to rephrase it, I'm not sure what the question that's being asked is, but I'd be more than happy if you want to throw another question up there. I know you cannot now. Here's another question. I know you cannot now, but some commentators are speculating that a tax law will take effect in 2023 in order to not dampen economic recovery. I would agree with that. I think that this is going to be a huge problem if they try to do that, but let's bifurcate that question into its actuality of who will they tax. Do you think that the economy and the general public would be angry if they reduced the estate tax from 22 million to $1 million? No. Why? Because, people are going to say, oh, that's just the rich. They don't understand. It might be just somebody that's just a normal person that has $1 million house that they've lived in for 30 years. So there's going to be taxes that I really believe that they're going to implement right now, but I don't believe all of it is going to get pushed through because of the economic recovery. But they are going to go after some taxes that they will claim will not affect the economy. Bitcoin is crazy. What is your advice for the long run? I think it's going to become a currency, but we don't know if it, is it going to be Ethereum? Is it going to be Bitcoin? How are they going to implement this? We saw that Wells Fargo dumped in 100 million. We saw Mass Mutual dumped in 100 million. We see this morning, that the mayor of Miami wants to buy Bitcoin with the government surplus. It is a gamble. There's no foundation to the value of Bitcoin. So in the long run, I'm staying away from it. I do that thing that Warren Buffett does. If I don't understand it, zero investment. If it has no earnings or potential for earnings, zero. I put zero into it. Let's see. It seems like more fiscally responsible currencies would be a hedge against dollar deflation. Well, that was always the concept, that if you invested in Canadians, but again, your entire investment in what we now state as fiscally responsible is completely out of your control. We saw that the Canadian government, when their currency was stronger than ours, they increased taxes. They came out with the GAT tax, I think it was. They changed things, and then we flipped. So again, investing in other countries' currencies because they have a hedge against us right now, or because they currently have a more fiscally responsible government, can change on a dime. Anything from natural disaster to change in government, just a change in the way that we operate. So again, my opinion is investing in foreign currencies is as risky as investing in Bitcoin. It does not give us a hedge against inflation or against American currencies. Let's see. If the big boys are moving out as tax refugees, should not the rest of us follow suit? Yeah, I mean, and over the years, back in the 80s, when I worked for a firm, we were creating offshore trusts in the Nevis Islands, Belize Islands. We were creating structures for extremely wealthy people and using different countries to place a lot of money. But what you have to do is you have to compare. Now there's a couple different things that have happened. One is the cost. And so if you are dealing with $100 million and the cost to set that up and operate it is $10,000 to $20,000 a year, but you're saving $1 million a year, absolutely, then you look at it. But the other issue right now that we're faced with, which is why we try to dissuade people from doing this, is during the Obama years, I think it was the second year in, he got a law passed that would make you financially disclose every single account and financial instrument that you had any control over or any indirect control over. Failure to disclose that is a criminal offense, which is why we know about the UBS Switzerland debacle, where they put just normal people in jail, doctors, dentists, architects. They made them wear ankle bracelets for years, just as an embarrassment to tell people this is when UBS was setting up Swiss bank accounts. And people were putting in 50 grand. I mean, it wasn't like, the Rockefellers were hiding all their money. It was just normal people putting some money offshore. And the government now has this. So if you think that you can set money up offshore and keep it hidden, yeah, but you can go to jail if you get caught. To me, that's not worth it. So the playing field is different. And just because there's some promoter out there says, yes, you should do this. I was talking to a client in Texas, and he was talking about this stuff, and must have been a week or 2 weeks thereafter, there was a big law firm in Houston that all the lawyers are going to jail, and the people putting the money in there was going to jail because they were hiding all this money offshore. Okay. So again, to me, it's just not worth it. Let's see. Mid-level providers are making a killing by practicing independently of physicians, by the way. I think we're going to see a whole new, just like people will move from one area to another to avoid massive and extreme taxation. You put too much pressure on an industry, they're going to figure a way around it. And I think doctors are going to have to start doing that, because why would a doctor want to go through all that education, all that risk, all that time, the sacrifices that they make with their family to earn a third of what most people that maybe an executive might be earning, and he has all the risk. Yeah, I agree. If 1031s go away and real estate crashes, how long before? I have no idea how long it would take to recover. If we take a look at the 1986 Tax Reform Act, it took almost 7 or 8 years just for real estate to recover. Doesn't mean that you can't make money. Remember, when things crash, people are always worried about the stock market crashing. Oh my gosh, kidding me? That's when the opportunities avail themselves, and that's where you make the most amount of money. Keep in mind, the most number of millionaires per capita were minted in 1929 during the greatest depression in the world has ever seen. That's when the most number of millionaires were made, because they took advantage of the opportunities. So if the real estate does crash, we go on buying sprees. This is where we can capitalize, right? Let's see. The next question is, hoarding cash now if both stocks and real estate crash. Which are you in? I'm not hoarding cash. Oh no, not at all. I'm fully invested at 99% in stocks. I'm holding cash back for real estate though. I think real estate is another 8 to 10 months. And then that's when I'll probably go on a buying spree again. But with the stimulus being pumped into the markets, now is definitely not the time to sit on the sidelines with cash. Given we are not spending during COVID, where is the best place to build up idle cash? Since savings accounts are paying minuscule interest rates, I would just go with a short-term tip, a Treasury inflation protected security portfolio with maturities of less than 2 years. It's not going to make a killing. It's going to make 1.5%. But with the removal of the Phillips curve and inflation slated to hit between 4 and 5% in this year and next year, you could knock it out of the park with a simple, short-term duration tip and just hold that cash. If you want to go back into real estate, there is a storm coming in real estate, and I don't care. I'm sorry if you're in the real estate market and you sell real estate, you're going to be super wealthy because there's going to be so much turnover in the next year to year and a half. You're going to make a killing. So don't worry about the prices going down if you're the real estate person. The turnover will go up. Okay, so again, short term, I would say tips are the best place to go. Okay, what time are we at here? Wow, we went pretty long. So, okay. Well, I'm going to leave it open here for about 1 more minute, see if we have any more questions coming in, because I want to make sure that we get off. And I actually said 90 minutes, so I think by the time that we wrap this up, we'll be pretty close to on schedule. Okay, well, listen, hey, thanks everybody for joining in tonight. Hopefully this gave you a little insight as to not only the algorithms that we build, we watch, we follow, which is how we direct where clients' money goes, how we plan for taxes, but hopefully it'll help you understand what's on the horizon, especially since literally our government is completely turned upside down, and we are onto an entirely new chapter in our economic lives. Hey, with that in mind, thanks for attending. We'll see you all next time. Remember, Friday, 4 o'clock, PST, broadcast. Just Google YouTube, H&H Retirement Design. You'll find the channel. Have a great night.